How would you describe your relationship with sleep? Do you struggle with falling asleep or staying asleep? Has the quality of your sleep been dragging down your life? Or maybe you've tried other sleep aids only to find they didn't do the trick. Here's the deal. Sleep is the cornerstone of overall health. When we get good sleep, both our minds and bodies operate at their peak. And quality sleep can also sharpen our focus, boost energy, and elevate our moods. So how do we reach that perfect dream state? 3 words. Beams Dream Powder. It's been an absolute game changer for me. I've struggled with insomnia off and on, and overall, falling asleep has always been a challenge for me. My listeners get a special discount on Beams Dream Powder. They're science-backed, healthy hot cocoa for sleep with no added sugar. Better sleep has never tasted better. I've taken over-the-counter sleep aids for longer than I'd like to admit, and I feel so much better taking something with natural ingredients. Other sleep aids can cause next-day grogginess, but Dream contains a powerful, all-natural blend of reishi, magnesium, L-theanine, apigenin, and melatonin to help you fall asleep, stay asleep, and wake up refreshed. If you want to try Beam's best-selling Dream Powder, get up to 40% off for a limited time when you go to shopbeam.com/noise and use code NOISE at checkout. That's shopbeam.com/noise and use code NOISE for up to 40% off.
Every time you disagree with me, I say to you, stop gaslighting me. Gaslighting is not the same thing as disagreeing. So gaslighting has the particular feature of that pivot in the conversation. You asked me about me, I'm now talking about you. You asked me about me, I'm deflecting it onto something else. You complain about something about me, I take your character apart. And so it is about that pivot, and it does happen in a power dynamic.
You're listening to Make Some Noise podcast, episode number 633 with guest Robin Stern. Welcome to Make Some Noise podcast, your guide for strategies, tools, and insight to empower yourself. I'm your host, Andrea Owen, global speaker, entrepreneur, life coach since 2007, and author of 3 books that have been translated into 18 languages and are available in 22 countries. Each week, I'll bring you a guest or a lesson that will help you maximize unshakable confidence, master resilience, and make some noise in your life. You ready? Let's go. Hi, everyone. Welcome to another episode of the podcast. I'm so glad you're here. Couple quick and easy announcements. If you saw on Instagram last week, was it last week? A couple weeks ago? I announced that 52 Ways to Live a Kick-Ass Life has been revised and updated and is getting ready for re-release. Did I already tell you over here on the podcast? I forget sometimes. I'm sorry if I forgot. But yes, this book came out 11 years ago, everybody. This was my kickoff to being an author. This was my first book baby, 52 Ways to Live a Kick-Ass Life, with that pink cover. I know a lot of you listening, that was your first introduction to me. That's how you found me and then the podcast. And I appreciate all of you so much for that. And you've probably heard me say, hey, I wish I could go back and edit some of the things that I wrote in there a long time ago before I knew better, or just expand. And I did that. I did both of those things. And we added chapter challenges to every single chapter. And when I say we, I mean me. I did it. I wrote it. And I always want you guys to take action. If you feel like it, if you want to just read a self-help book to read a self-help book, then do that. There's nothing wrong with that. But for those of you that really want to do the work, that is going to be something new in this book. So comes out at the end of December. You'll hear me talk about it more when December comes around, 2024. But for now, please keep your eyes and ears open for that. The other announcement is that I'm getting closer to really setting a date and planning out this Daring Way retreat that's going to be here in Greensboro, North Carolina in the new year. Head on over to andreaowen.com/retreat to be the first to know when I officially open registration and to read about the details. Like, what is this? What does that mean? What is the Daring Way? What is it? All right. That is enough about that. Let me tell you about today's guest, for those of you that don't know her. Robin Stern, Ph.D., is the co-founder and senior advisor to the director, Yale Center for Emotional Intelligence. She's a licensed psychoanalyst with 30 years of experience treating individuals, couples, and families. She's the author of The Gaslight Effect, the Gaslight Effect Recovery Guide, and is the host of the Gaslight Effect podcast. So without further ado, here is Robin. Robin, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Andrea. I'm really delighted to be here. Thank you. Thank you for making this available to so many women and for inviting me on.
Oh, well, thank you. I love that. Yeah. I mean, I was telling you right before we started recording, I've been doing this for 11 years, which in internet time is a lifetime.
Amazing.
And 600 and something episodes, and I still love it. I still love having these conversations and bringing experts like you onto the show to help people. So let's get into it. Gaslighting is one of those things. I don't know if I've actually shared this on the show, but I was a victim of gaslighting in my first marriage many, many years ago. And back then, we weren't calling it that. It was just lying and being deceptive. And when the word started to come into the mainstream, I don't know how many years ago, it was so, and to be honest with you, it was a little re-traumatizing to think about it and think like, oh, that's what happened to me. It was very specific. Me being told I was crazy for thinking my husband at the time was having an affair. I was imagining things, that would never happen. How would you think that I would do something like that? And the most obvious lies I was being questioned on. And
is it okay to interrupt you? Okay,
yes, go ahead.
So during that time, did you begin to think, maybe he's right? Maybe I am so.
Yes. I think because I wanted to think I was wrong.
Yeah.
Nobody wants to think that their spouse is having an extramarital affair. This person I'd been with since I was a teenager, and I was 30 at the time, when it happened. And then also it's devastating to think that you might be that crazy, that I, as a human, I'm like, could I be making all of this up?
Right.
Then like something's wrong with me. Something's wrong with my brain. And then I end up apologizing to him.
Right. Of course. For being so needy or so jealous or so paranoid or
crazy.
Something. So crazy.
So crazy. Yeah, that. And so I think I would love to start from the beginning, and my audience knows for the most part what this is, but you talk about the stages of gaslighting. So, and you can use my story as an example or however you like to speak of it, but what are the stages?
So the stages of gaslighting are disbelief, defense, and then depression. And disbelief is, let's say your husband doesn't come home when he says he's going to come home one night, and you ask him where he is, and he says something like, "Oh, you've become so paranoid," and you think, that's really annoying that he said that, or it's really aggravating that he said that, or no, that's just not true of me. Mm-hmm. And he makes little one-off comments over time, and eventually you begin to think, could he be right? And then defense is, I'm not paranoid. I just, you were just out all night. Like, what are you talking about? Like, mm-hmm. I don't want to belabor your situation. So let me use something that I know in fact happened. How's that?
Okay. Yes.
I use a different example. So let me start from the beginning about that. So I worked with someone whose boyfriend said to her, when we walk down the street, you're very distracted and you're flirting with other people. And yes, I know it's your neighborhood and I know you're going to tell me that you're friendly, but actually I think you're flirting with other people. And she said, no, I'm not flirting with other people. That's ridiculous. Stop. Mm-hmm. Over time, like I did suggest in your example also, that over time, even these one-off comments, when they begin to be repeated, are enough for you to say, could he be right? Mm-hmm. Could it be true? Could that be me? And I'm just not aware of it. So in this situation, she began to think, well, I don't think I'm flirting, but I really love you and I'm committed to you. And this is just about you and me. And I'm sorry. And I didn't mean it.
You don't want to hurt your partner.
You don't want to hurt your partner. Mm-hmm. But more importantly, you don't want your partner to think that you're a flirt either.
Right.
You don't want your partner to think, perhaps in your case, that you're paranoid or you're mm-hmm. so overly sensitive. And so in the case of my client, there were many other examples where she could say, no, I'm not a flirt. You see, we went to that party and we held hands the entire time. We were kissing in the backyard. And of course, I'm not a flirt and I'm not doing that. And he said, well, I have I really want you to think about that. And I have good evidence because you made eye contact with this guy and it was clear that he was flirting with you. So she began to think, I don't know anymore. And could he be right? I think I'm right, but could he be right? And one of the things that characterizes the stage of defensiveness is that kind of rumination, going over the conversation again and again in your mind. I don't know, I think that that's the way it is, but he's telling me it's not the way it is. And so he said, I have the cure for that. When we walk down the street, look at the sidewalk. Don't talk to people. Don't engage with people. We won't have the problem anymore. And what was great about that for that couple is that the problem did go away. They stopped fighting. He stopped accusing her of flirting. She was looking at the ground as they walked down the street. Mm-hmm. The only problem was she wasn't feeling so great about herself doing that. So she began to complain about it. She told me in retrospect. And then he upped the ante and he said, when we get to the restaurant, I want you to be sure that you're always facing the wall. Because if you're facing the wall, nobody's going to approach you and say hello, and you're not going to be tempted to flirt back or to say hello. And besides, I want all your attention. And when you're flirting with other people and you're engaging with other people, I don't have your attention. Mm-hmm. And that was the point that she sought out therapy.
Okay.
And she said, I know that he's right, that this cure-all works for a relationship and we're not fighting, but I'm just so depressed. I don't know how I can go on like this in this relationship. And that's the third stage. When you are depressed, when you begin, in that case, she began to think, I'm obviously not like the girlfriend I thought I was. I'm obviously not communicating to him the security that he needs to feel. And I don't feel good either. And so she was taking the blame on herself. And that's so typical for women. Mm-hmm. That when you can see black and blue marks, when you know that somebody is cursing and screaming at you, you can say, he did that.
Yeah.
But when there's this ephemeral issues with your self-esteem and this kind of something's wrong, you end up more than not pointing the finger at yourself and saying, I'm just not that girlfriend.
Yeah.
What's wrong with me?
I appreciate that example because as you were telling the story, my first thought was, I know even as a younger woman in my 20s, I would have never put up with that kind of like rules that her partner was giving her. Mm-hmm. However, I did fall prey to what my then husband did to me. So it's interesting to me, and this brings me to my question. I hate to use the word like good gaslighters, like master gaslighters. I'm assuming, and correct me if I'm wrong, that they get to know a partner and they can find the vulnerabilities of, like, for instance, ways that, because I'm certified in shame resilience, and one of the modules that fascinates me around shame is that we all have ways that we would never want to be perceived by other people, and they're specific within the different roles that we have. Mm-hmm. So, for example, one of my shame triggers, ways I would never want to be perceived in my romantic relationship, is needy, crazy, and he pushed those buttons.
Yeah,
and I bet he knew that I would never put up with, look at the ground, like that kind of, I don't know if you want to call it like subservient control, but it worked the other way. And so is that part of what a gaslighter does, is like find ways to manipulate and be specific with their gaslighting?
Gaslighters can get very good at being specific with their gaslighting. And also sometimes it's trial and error. So a gaslighter will just gaslight to stabilize themselves in the moment, or to get out of a hot spot, or to make sure you don't find out the information you don't want them to find out, or to lie or deflect. And it works. And when it works, you think, okay, so I'll go there again. I'll go there again. And also, I believe you when you say that you would never have put up with that. Mm-hmm. But isn't it amazing what we end up putting up with?
Right.
In
it's like a different flavor.
Yeah. I mean, I'll share my own story with you. I was with my ex-husband. I was writing this book and interviewing patients, and or putting this proposal together, interviewing patients. And I was married to someone who was very personable and affable and never raised his voice, was never mean, but he was a good guy gaslighter. He was always late, but not 5 minutes late, like a half hour late.
Okay.
And at the beginning of that pattern, I would say, when you come home a half hour late for dinner, it really doesn't feel very good and it's not okay. And we would go on. He would say, oh, I don't want to hear about it. I was busy. I was caught up with work or whatever. Then his answer became, you have a real problem with time. Your parents taught you something about time that's just not true. What's the big deal of being on time? And I thought, no, this is not okay. This is bullshit, right? And I said, no, I'm sorry. My parents were fine. And my being on time is respectful. He kept at it. He kept coming home late. And I would say, I'm just not going to wait dinner for you. He would say, whatever you want, you don't have a problem with time. And he would repeat you have a problem with time. Your parents are very uptight about time. Other women, he would tell me, wouldn't be so uptight about time.
Oh, no.
And I began to think, even though I knew he was gaslighting me, even though I was writing about it at the time, I began to think, could he be right? I saw it happening to me. It was so fascinating.
Interesting. Okay. And also, as someone who writes women's empowerment books, like there are times where I don't listen to my own tools and strategies, even, when I know that they're science-based and things like that, and have some kind of tender spots. So it's always fascinating to me to sort of stand outside and look at why. What was the specific reason that I let that slide, that I compromised my own values, that I self-abandoned, really. I walked away from my soul and who I am. So I'm curious for you, have you had the opportunity to kind of dissect it? And could you share with us, if it's not too personal, why you think that you kind of allowed him to take you down that road?
Yes. So I'm happy to share it, and especially because of wanting to help people not do it.
Because the women that listen to this show are smart women, Robin.
Right.
I appreciate it.
Yeah. And you know what? I am a smart woman as well. And I could never have imagined that somebody could tell me my parents distorted my view of time and I would think that was okay. I didn't actually, but I did question it. I think there were two things. One is that I wasn't prepared to have the big argument where I would then have to say, I just can't do this. I mean, eventually I did. He's my ex-husband.
Yes.
But the other piece was that there was a part of me that began to think when he brought in the other women, I thought, maybe there are people who are more flexible. Maybe he's right that other people are more flexible. And I forgot about the fact that didn't matter because for me, the issue was it was disrespectful. And if other women wanted to be more freewheeling about time and they didn't care about their evening or in the same way that I did. And there are people who you want to show up at 7:20, great. You want to show up at 7:40, we'll eat whenever.
I don't want to be friends with them, but okay.
And I didn't want to be friends with them either. But there are people saying, whenever you get home, honey, we'll have dinner. That wasn't me. And I remember saying to him, I wish I were the kind of woman who would say, honey, whenever you get home, but I'm not that woman.
Yeah.
I'm not that woman. And then I stopped saying, I wish that was that kind of woman because
Be married to one of them.
Yes, exactly.
I that's the first thing I thought of when you said that. If I was like, girl, if we were friends when that happened and you told me that story, the thing out of my mouth would, you tell him if he wants to go be married to one of them. But I wanted to underscore what you said about realizing whether it was very explicit thoughts or not, that because I have been in this situation with I'm divorced. I'm a multi-award winning divorcee. I have 2 divorces now. With my second marriage, I very much have been in that place where that you are compromising, that you are self-abandoning, and you also know that if you bring it up and you have that conversation to set that boundary and say, this is not okay with me, then what will likely happen is that you're going to also have to have a conversation about the relationship being over.
That's right.
And it took me years to be fully prepared for that. Mm-hmm. So I just want to give people grace who are listening, people who are eyeball deep in self-help and they listen to people like us, they can start to beat themselves up for being in that place. I call it the point of no return, where you are conscious of what behavior you want to change, but you don't have the courage yet or even the words and skills to move forward and take action on it.
Or sometimes the resources. Sometimes
Exactly.
for many people, they just don't have it. They don't have the people, they don't have the money, they don't have the,
It can be an incredibly hard place to be. So I just wanted to give voice to that. We need to take an ad break, but when we get back, I want to ask you about political gaslighting, because that is very interesting to me. So we'll be right back, everyone. Hey everyone, if you're anything like me, you love a good home-cooked meal, but you don't always have time for the meal planning, the prepping, the shopping, all of that, right? Well, that's where HelloFresh comes in. With farm-fresh, pre-portioned ingredients delivered straight to your door, they make it so easy to whip up delicious meals without the hassle. No more endless recipe searching, and no more buying a whole jar of some random spice you'll use once. HelloFresh sends you exactly what you need, fresh and perfectly portioned. Plus, with 50 recipes to choose from each week, you'll never get bored. I personally love their fit and wholesome options, keeping my meals healthy without sacrificing flavor. And here's the best part. If your schedule changes, HelloFresh has your back. You can easily adjust your delivery date or even skip a week if life gets too crazy. Get 10 free meals at HelloFresh.com/free MSN. Applied across 7 boxes, new subscribers only, varies by plan. That's 10 free HelloFresh meals just by going to HelloFresh.com/free MSN. You know what's the worst? Getting a surprise bill that needs to be paid right away, but you don't have the cash until your next payday, which might be a whole week away. Earnin is an app that gives you access to your pay as you work, up to $100 per day or up to $750 per pay period. Just download the Earnin app and verify your paycheck. Then access up to $100 a day as you work and leave an optional tip. Any money you access plus tips are automatically repaid from your next paycheck. You can use the money you get from Earnin for a special weekend away, for your mental health, getting that holiday gift early that's on sale right now, or even a personal growth retreat. Make Earnin a part of your financial routine and join Earnin's over 3.5 million customers who say things like, when I think about Earnin, I think about financial stability, security. It gives me a lot of peace of mind. Download Earnin today, spelled EARNIN, in the Google Play or Apple App Store. When you download the Earnin app, type in noise under podcast when you sign up, please. It'll really help the show. Noise under podcast. Subject to your available earnings, location, daily max, and pay period max. See earnin.com/TOS for details. Earnin is a financial technology company, not a bank. Bank products are issued by Evolve Bank and Trust, member FDIC.
This is Kristen Bell.
And Adam Brody.
And we're dating.
In our new show, Nobody Wants This.
Right. We're not really dating.
No, in real life, we're married.
Right. Married to other people, not each other.
Oh, this is complicated.
Right. It's just like our love lives in Nobody Wants This, a show about what happens when a bold and sometimes provocative podcast host finds her unlikely match in a sweet traditional rabbi.
You can watch every episode of Nobody Wants This now, only on Netflix.
All right. I am so glad that you actually brought this to my attention, and I don't know anything about this. And so this is being released during an election year. We are a couple months out from the election. And so can you talk to us about what is political gaslighting?
It's just about bringing gaslighting to politics. It's about the people. I'm not a political pundit. I'm not going to talk about individual people being gaslighters. Yesterday, the Washington Post released a really very cool cartoon version of an article that I wrote with my colleague Mark Brackett on political gaslighting.
We'll put that in the show notes because I definitely want to see it for sure.
Great. So any relationship with a power dynamic can be gripped by gaslighting. Mm-hmm. And that includes relationships between politicians and the public. Yeah. And gaslighting is that kind of emotional abuse where the abuser leads the target to question their own judgments, just like we were talking about. Mm-hmm. And at very worst, their own sanity, and certainly their own way that they believe things to be, their own perception. So how do you know if a politician is gaslighting you? So 5 signs to look for. They sow confusion, division, and doubt. One way to address whether or not your politician is sowing confusion and doubt, if you're feeling confused after listening to them, is to monitor your own news outlets and social media for sensationalized rhetoric and check in with yourself, your feelings, your thoughts, to remain grounded. They deflect. Be wary of candidates who undermine the credibility of anyone who questions them. So you ask your candidate something, and he takes you apart for your credentials or something about you personally, or they, and be wary of those candidates. They use jabs of shame, criticism, and conversation pivots. So pay attention to a candidate who dehumanizes individuals or groups. Language that denigrates or incites violence is also a red flag. They need to be right. Discussing and listening to opposing points of view in a respectful manner is a healthy form of debate.
Yeah.
Always double check your facts and be wary of the politician with self-serving attempts to manipulate people. And 5, they are unwilling to take responsibility for their actions or for changing their mind. And a gaslighter's reality is their only reality in each moment. If a candidate causes you to question your own principles or what you saw, pause and consider what they may be doing. And any candidate is capable of using their influence to gaslight. So as the election approaches, we say in the article, make it a habit of checking in with your values.
Oh, wow. What a list. I was thinking of various politicians on all sides of of the divide when you were naming that list. And one of the things that was interesting that you mentioned, which isn't necessarily specific to politics, is the power dynamic.
So that is really a pillar of gaslit. Yeah. I mean, it's really hard to walk away from a gaslighting moment when the person who's doing the gaslighting is somebody who you idealize, someone who has power over you. Sometimes, for example, in the workplace, if the person who has power over you is in fact your boss and you need your job, it may be really hard, not only hard, but not even realistic for you to walk away. You may, in those cases, I talk about helping people limit their gaslighting exposure. Just for example, if you think someone has more power than you do in a social situation, and they tell you something about yourself that you don't think is true, but they have more power, and maybe they're smarter, and maybe they know more, and maybe you should you should think about it again.
Oh, that's fascinating. It reminds me of a therapist that I hired, I don't know, maybe 4 or 5 years ago. And I hired her specifically to unpack the trauma around my first marriage where the gaslighting had occurred that I mentioned. And she pointed out, she said, when you're telling me the stories of what happened, you're making a lot of excuses for his behavior. And I had a really difficult time naming it as traumatic and at times abusive. Yeah. And she asked me, like, why is that? And I said, because I did it back to him. And in retrospect, I believe what was happening was that he held the power, I think just because, and he was only about a year older than me, just because of the gender dynamic of it being a male-female relationship. And I was desperate for some semblance of power because I felt like I didn't have any, because I felt like, he was doing all these things. He was, calling me crazy. And I was so desperate for it. So I don't know if that's something that you talk about in your work around what I've heard is called reactive abuse, people who kind of like start to fight fire with fire. And do you see that sometimes? And
I do see that sometimes. Sometimes it is, in fact, a healthier response than allowing yourself to devolve into what some people call soul destroying. The gaslight effect becomes soul destroying, that they can't find any joy and they feel like they have no sense of agency. So, well, certainly I don't think that gaslighting in any way is a healthy dynamic. It can be a self-protective dynamic, a way that you begin to establish power for yourself. And while I don't recommend it, I do see it sometimes as a healthier response, and maybe as a response, especially if the person's aware of it. that will get you into treatment, into therapy, to begin to work. Wait, and if I'm finding myself doing this too.
Yeah.
Like I'm really not being honest, or I'm
I felt
really
ashamed
trying to.
for it.
Yes.
It didn't feel good to me. It felt awful. It goes against who I'm not a cruel person. It just felt terrible.
That sounds wonderful to me in the sense that it got you to look at yourself. I'm sure it didn't feel wonderful, but in terms of moving towards well-being,
right?
Better that you are noticing something that's out of line with your value system and trying to do something about it.
Yeah. It felt good for like a minute. Then it went away. It was very fleeting.
And even if it felt good for more than a minute, when you stand back and you say, what is this relationship about?
Yeah.
Oh, he's manipulating me. I'm trying to manipulate him. Like, that's not so great.
Yeah, it is not so great. Well, can you tell us, for someone who is maybe sort of sensing it in the moment, maybe they feel like they're being gaslighted, are there ways that they can change that dynamic either in the moment or in the relationship? Like, what's your advice for that?
So I think if you feel like you're caught in that kind of gaslighting tango, in some kind of a power struggle, you're trying to have a conversation and the person keeps pivoting the conversation to blame you or deflecting. As long as you feel physically safe and you can have the conversation, which is, of course, important. It's really an important thing because some people don't feel physically safe to have the conversation. But if you do, I think saying something like, hey, whenever I ask you something about yourself, suddenly we're talking about me, and I don't like that, and I feel manipulated by that. If that kind of approach, which is, we're going to have a conversation, I'm going to talk, you're going to listen and be respectful, you have empathy for me, I have empathy for you, goes well, that's great. Often, it doesn't go well at all. And often with a gaslighter, you say, there you go again. What, did you go to therapy today? Or there you go again. You must be talking to your crazy friend so-and-so about
Andrea.
Andrea, how much, and she doesn't like men anyway. She had 2 divorces,
I always want people to take responsibility.
Exactly. And so if that is the case, then you're talking to someone who really isn't empathic with your situation or isn't willing to be, isn't listening. And so your best strategy then is to opt out. I hear you feel strongly about that, but I don't agree with you.
Yeah.
I'm going to go have a cup of tea now. We're going to have to agree to disagree. I'm not comfortable with where this conversation's going. Let's pick this up when we have our emotional temperatures a little bit low. I'd like to talk about this, but maybe we can have an email exchange, because I'm finding that whenever I say something, suddenly we're talking about me. And then follow those email exchanges. One of the things that I always suggest to people is write down your conversations. If they say, I don't know what's going on, maybe it's gaslighting, but maybe I'm just being too sensitive. No, you're too sensitive. Okay, maybe you are sensitive, but that doesn't mean it's not gaslighting. Writing things down or keeping track of, wait a minute, this is happening again. Every time I say, can we talk about where you were last night? What's wrong with you? What's wrong with you? Did you have a bad day? Is that why we need to talk about where I was last night? What did you do last night? Yeah, are you projecting? If that's the way the conversation goes, then it's no longer a conversation. And then you need an opt-out strategy.
We need to take one more ad break. And when we get back, I want to ask you about the term gaslighting being overused. So we'll be right back.
I'm Margaret.
And I'm Amy.
And together we host the podcast, What Fresh Hell? Laughing in the Face of Motherhood.
Margaret, I would say you're sort of a where are my keys kind of mom.
Correct. Sometimes a where are my kids kind of mom. Well, you're, Amy, more of a we were supposed to leave 35 seconds ago, mom.
I mean, touche. In each episode of What Fresh Hell, we come at a topic from our usually completely opposite perspectives. I bring the research.
And I bring kind of the gimlet eye. Like, is that research really going to work, people?
And almost 10 million downloads later, we're still laughing.
We also talk to experts in the parenting field, plus parents with stories we can all learn from.
We make each other laugh, we challenge each other's assumptions, and we have what we think is the best parenting community on the internet.
Check out What Fresh Hell, Laughing in the Face of Motherhood, wherever you listen to podcasts.
No one told us the truth about parenthood. Why? This is the podcast everyone needed before they had kids, because now that those little ones are here, there is a lot to unpack. I'm Rachel Shepardota, and I am your host for the podcast No One Told Us, where we tell the truth about parenting and let you in on all the stuff you really should have known about before having kids. I am the founder of Hey Sleepy Baby, but this podcast is so much more than sleep. We'll be diving into all the topics that you really care about and need to know while you do your best job raising those adorable tiny humans. Our goal is to just make you feel less alone and less overwhelmed. There are so many things that no one tells us before becoming a parent, and I think that we should really pull back the curtain on becoming a first-time or second-time mom or dad to share the good, the bad, and the ugly. We'll have a little education, a little fun, and a whole lot of heart that goes into each and every episode. So join me and our amazing guests each week to hear us talk about what no one told us.
Do you think that the terms like gaslighting or even trauma or traumatized are being overused? And if so, is there sort of a consequence in that?
So the answer is yes, I do think they're being overused and misused. And in fact, I wrote a piece on that. And I'll send you a link to an article that I wrote in Psychology Today on that. And I think it's really important that these terms are used more than ever before, because it does then give people, it takes away a little bit of the stigma, and people can talk about it more freely. More people are seeking help than ever before. And hopefully there are enough therapists out there, which I know in many places there are not, but hopefully there are. If you need a therapist or a counselor or a trusted someone to talk about this with you, talking to your listeners now, I hope that you can find someone who's really great. But the consequence is that the terms become somewhat meaningless. So if every time you disagree with me, I say to you, stop gaslighting me. Gaslighting is not the same thing as disagreeing.
Yeah. And it's also not the same thing as lying. Sometimes people are just straight up and down lying, and it's not
exactly.
Yeah.
So gaslighting has a particular feature of that pivot in the conversation. You asked me about me. I'm now talking about you. You asked me about me. I'm deflecting it onto something else. You complain about something about me. I take your character apart. And so it is about that pivot, and it does happen in a power dynamic. Sometimes in a moment, somebody might say something that could be a gaslighting statement, but that doesn't mean you feel gaslighted, because being gaslighted means that you've accepted the invitation to get into that gaslight tango. Unwittingly, of course. I'm not blaming anyone who does it, because we are these very smart women, and we did it, right? Yeah. We accepted that gaslight tango offer because you're looking for something else. I want to join you. I don't want to fight with you. Right. It could be possible. I'm very empathic, and I'm going to see it from your side, right? So there are a couple of traps that people get into. One is the empathy trap, where I'm going to stand in your shoes just long enough to see me the way you see me. And then somewhere along the line, I forget that I have my own shoes. So I'm stuck in your shoes, right? Or the explanation trap. He had a very controlling mother. Of course, he didn't call me for 4 days because he doesn't want to be tied down in that way.
Yeah.
And he doesn't like to be questioned. Probably was questioned a lot in his bad first marriage. So I'll just accommodate that. And so we get into, especially as women, we get into accommodating to the reality, the wishes of someone else, to the point where sometimes we accommodate so much that we're giving up essential pieces of who we are.
Yes, the accommodating piece. My third book, Make Some Noise, is a lot about that, about just the culture and the social conditioning that we receive as women. My daughter's about to turn 15, and I take her to school. Well, I was taking her and one of her friends to the mall. And when they sit in the back seat, I don't bring it up out of nowhere, but the topic kind of came up, and I just do little mini lectures, and it's things like that. And I say, like the other day I said, I just want you to know, I'm not going to lecture you, but you do not need to put up with people's poor behavior in order to make everyone comfortable, especially boys. Because it was a case where this boy wanted to give me his number, and I don't really like him, but I took his number anyway, and he added me on Snapchat. And I was like, I'm going to stop you right there. Because and one of them said, like, I didn't want to be mean. I didn't want to be rude. I didn't want to hurt his feelings.
Because we have to be nice, and it's so important to be empathic and to be accommodating. Yeah.
So my lesson,
and it is great.
You can still be kind and say no.
Yes. You can be kind and say no. And in my book, I say that no is a whole sentence.
Yeah.
No.
I just never really got those lessons when I was 14. And I think it can have lasting effects. And this is so interesting. We have time for one more question before I send people to go find more about your work. But can you tell us, do you have a key piece of advice for staying out of relationships where people might gaslight us?
I have a couple of pieces of advice.
Okay.
One, if you are afraid to talk to your friends about your relationship because you feel ashamed or you don't know what they might say, think about whether or not you would recommend this guy or this woman, if it's a woman-to-woman relationship, to your best friend.
Or your child.
Or your child. Or your mother.
Right. Your sister. Mm-hmm.
Or your sister. Exactly. Thank you. Are you experiencing joy in this relationship? When you think about your partner, do you smile or get a tightness in your stomach? Are you the same person you were when you started the relationship? The same person in terms of being sturdy and strong and being able to make decisions? And do you know when you're standing in your truth that it's okay for you to disagree with your partner and still have a relationship?
Oh, those are all good questions. I encourage people to rewind, hit that rewind button and jot those down. I heard something on Instagram, I think it was, that was a similar question that said, if someone told you you're just like your partner, would you feel insulted or would you take that as a compliment? That's a big one.
That's a big one.
Yeah. And for me, it's been about, now that I'm 17 years out of that relationship that I mentioned, and also re-entered another relationship. And I left that one and I swore I will never mistrust my instincts again. And then what ended up happening? I mistrusted my instincts again. And so when it happened the second time, it was a different kind of lesson, I think. And it's a lot of what we just talked about around like feeling that I needed to accommodate, didn't want to hurt people's feelings, didn't want to blow up my family, like those types of things. But also now, I'm staring down the barrel at 50 now, Robin, and I want to walk into this decade with, I can't guarantee that I'm always going to follow my instincts, but I now do not want to sit in the discomfort when I don't. So it's almost a different perspective of it. And because that is not a fun place to be, of knowing what you need to do. Like I talked about in the beginning of our talk, like just that there's a lot of grief in that place too, of knowing that you're kind of going against what your body is telling you, what your heart is telling you.
I think that's so important. And I'm really glad you brought it up, because sometimes very early on, you see, like one thing that I didn't say about, like, look for those relationships that you can stand in your own integrity.
Yeah.
Like if you can't stand in your integrity, it's not okay. So on a first date, when you realize, wait a minute, like, that doesn't sound right. It's like, that guy doesn't have the same values, but I'm really attracted to him and he's so successful and it's so amazing. And you look at this whole beautiful picture and you forget that there's a part of the picture that's completely damaged, but you're not paying attention to that. How do you deal with that in the moment? How do you deal with knowing that you're walking into something? And is it that ghost of gaslighting that's following you?
The ghost of gaslighting. It's like, I imagine this ghost with a, instead of holding like a lantern, it's one of those, the gaslighting lamps, street lamps.
Right.
Down. That's how I imagine it. Maybe that's a cartoon for the next article that you write. Oh gosh, it's so interesting. It's one of those topics I think that can't get talked about enough because it has nuance to it. And you have said things that the previous experts didn't say. And again, it almost is like it has tentacles, depending on the relationship, depending on lots of different things. So I appreciate you so much. And I'm grateful for your time today. Where can people, we'll have that link to the articles that you wrote. Do you work with people one-on-one? Where can people go to find out more about you?
So I have a website. It's robinstern.com.
Okay. Robin with an I. Mm-hmm.
Robin with an I, just all one word, robinstern.com. And it has everything in it. And I have a podcast
awesome.
Called the Gaslight Effect Podcast. And I'd love for you to come and be my guest on the Gaslight Effect podcast.
We can talk about shame.
Mm-hmm. Yes, we can. I really like that.
Yeah.
It's a big reason, actually, that people stay.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
It's a big reason.
I have professional and personal experience.
And I'm glad you brought it up as in the last few minutes, because if you feel ashamed, really do everything you can to reframe to compassion.
Yeah. Yes. That's one of the main antidotes for shame and shame resilience is that self-compassion, which is for most people feels like learning a whole new language.
Yes. Right. Because we never include ourselves in the circle of people we give compassion to, do we?
We're very last.
Very rarely. Yes. Very rarely. Yeah.
So robinstern.com, we'll send people there. Thank you so much for your time today. And everyone listening, I appreciate your time as well. I know it's a non-renewable resource, and I'm grateful that you choose to spend it with us. And remember, it's our life's journey to make ourselves better humans and our life's responsibility to make the world a better place. Bye-bye for now. Hey everyone, thanks again for listening. I would be so incredibly grateful if you haven't done so already, if you could leave a review of this podcast on Apple Podcasts. Super easy if you already listen to your shows over there. But if you don't, or maybe you have the app on your phone, but you listen to the show on a different app, if you could leave a review for this show, it matters so much. I wish I could express how much it matters. I also wish that it didn't matter so much, but alas, it does. So if you haven't already, please go review and rate the show. It would mean so much to me. And thank you so much. I hope you have an amazing day.
Are you a parent in need of a laugh and a little escape? Look no further. Parenting is a Joke is the podcast you've been waiting for. Hey, I'm Ophira Eisenberg. I'm a stand-up comic and parent. And each week I chat with one of my top comedian pals who, just like you, are juggling careers, busy lives and schedules, and raising a family. You can expect candid stories, hilarious mishaps that happen on stage and at home, and just a lot of laughs. There's no expert advice here. Well, actually, sometimes a good idea does sneak its way in, but mostly just pure, relatable fun to remind you that we're all in this parenting adventure together. New episodes of Parenting is a Joke drop every Tuesday, so tune in, get ready to laugh, unwind, and maybe even feel a little bit better about your own parenting. Because sometimes that's exactly what your therapist, pediatrician, and bartender ordered. Subscribe now on your favorite podcast platform.